When the NES was relevant and still being sold, there were only 3 Star Wars movies in existence to pull from for making video games. The good old classic trilogy. I'm not the biggest fan of Star Wars, meaning I do enjoy those classic movies, but I can't recite many lines, nor do I find any joy in debating the finer plot points that diehards disagree on. I'll play the video games though, and the NES, much like the movies at the time, had 3 games. Technically, the NES had 2, and the Famicom had 1. What stinks is that the NES didn't get that full trilogy of games. It has Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, but no Return of the Jedi, making them measly paired together on the shelf appear as though something is missing. The Famicom game is based on the first film as well, and let's put some huge quotes around "based on," because those developers took some liberties with the plot revisions that even George Lucas would have regretted. And hey, it's understandable to think everyone has seen these movies, but turns out, I know adults my age who still haven't. So if you're not in the loop on the classic trilogy, I'm going to get a little spoilery here. So all you really need to know is, a desert orphan learns he has a superpower, takes the advice of an old man in a cave, finds a deadly baton, saves a princess, meets and fights his dad, falls in love with his sister, explodes his dad's house, meets an old talking frog, makes Indiana Jones his best friend, and nearly exterminates an entire tree gremlin population, not in that order. So let's see what's up with Star Wars games on the NES and Famicom.
The boy, where is he?
Hey, here we go. Going to the Death Star! Mom, ever heard of Nani?
Star Wars, a force stronger than your parents doesn't want you playing.
Okay, let's start off with the one folks are most familiar with. Star Wars on the NES is easily the best of the 3 in my opinion. Thanks to a lot of the other classic Star Wars games, even ones I'll get to later and certainly the ones on the Super Nintendo, people tend to associate these games with extreme difficulty. But I'm here to tell you that this one is highly doable and actually quite fun once you get the hang of it. The first part of the game is open world. You start out in a cave, and then once you exit it, it's on the land speeder you go and the world is your burrito. Just watch out for banthas. There are 3 things you should be doing. The first is finding nearby caves, venturing through them, and finding shield icons for the Millennium Falcon. These are critical, and I can't stress this enough. The whole point of these caves, most of them anyway, is to find these shields. You'll have to traipse through them with a few nearly blind jumps sprinkled in while avoiding falling into spiky pits and while outmaneuvering enemies to find these shields. They are sometimes off the beaten path too, so don't leave a cave unless you find a shield. You will come across some tough bad guys though. The sand people, for example, are tough to bring down and come at you fast, but in every encounter, you'll have a chance to separate yourself from them by taking a higher or lower ledge, or even being on the other side of a rock. Do that. Steer clear of flying enemies because they'll knock you backward into your death, and remember that holding down B lets you run faster and jump further, like in Mario. This is key to many of the stages. Be patient, learn the caves, you've got this. The second thing you should do is find R2-D2. He's holed up in a sand crawler on Tatooine, and you'll need to get our Robo Boy out of there. This will likely be your first challenge in the game. You'll learn about the anti-gravity tubes here, and you should get familiar with those for later. Then the last thing you should do on Tatooine is find Obi-Wan. He has your space baton. Like the shields you're looking for, and these are the shields you're looking for, he's in a cave and tucked away off the beaten path. Find him, get the space baton, and once you have collected 8 shields from Tatooine, it's time to go to Mos Eisley. Once there, zip-zap your way through the cantina and find Han Solo, but don't use him. Here's the thing about this game that kinda stinks. If you use one of the side characters, like Han or Leia, and they die, they're gone for good. You don't have to have them alive to beat the game, but think of it like the Ninja Turtles game on the NES. It's better if you have them all so you can cycle through them in a pinch. Luke, on the other hand, can die and you'll just use continues and come back with your entire party. So you found Han, yay, now equip Luke and that light sword. Now that you've gotten to this part of the game, the rest of it is mostly linear. No more open world planet stages. You'll just be making your way through either platforming mazes, space combat stages, or a top-down blow-up the Death Star stage. The platforming mazes can be a real bugger. This will take you the most time to figure out. There are doors all over the place, and they exit all over the place. There are precarious platforming sections where a wrong move can send you to your death, or, almost worse, send you to a lower level and make you replay a long section over again. In these platforming stages, you get 3 lives, and if you use all those up, you have to use a continue. The game gives you 10 continues to start, which seems forgiving, and is if you're learning the game, but you'll burn through them quickly in your first few playthroughs by just learning where all the death traps are. However, in the flying stages, 1 death equals 1 continue. Do not die in a flying stage. And there are 3 flying stages. The first one is the worst and is the one you were collecting those shields for. You have to survive traversing through an asteroid belt, and you have no defense. You must simply try to avoid asteroids for nearly a full minute, and 2 hits takes out a shield. If you show up here with only a handful of shields, you might burn through all your continues in getting through this alone, and it's nearly impossible to go through without taking some damage. So get those shields from Tatooine. The other flying stages have you shooting stuff, mainly TIE fighters who launch green orbs at you. Shoot the fighters and definitely shoot those green orbs. If the orbs hit you too many times, you'll once again go down and use up a whole continue. No bueno. The most difficult part of the game, in my opinion, is what is referred to as the Blue Room. You'll have to do some learning and practicing here. This is where I found that some characters have different abilities, like in Super Mario Bros. 2 almost. Like Leia can outjump both Han and Luke, and she's handy here in a couple of spots because of that. Later, you have to outmaneuver this guy by jumping over him and under the spikes, and you have to go through this gravity field without touching any spikes, or under these spikes while dodging the gunner. This level is cursed. It's kind of downhill from here though, in difficulty at least. The game hits on the bigger beats of the first film in a fun way. You get to see Tatooine and Mos Eisley, you get to spy Leia in her cell, and you get to fight the trash compactor, I think. You get to fight bounty hunters and fly the Millennium Falcon, and you get to deftly navigate the narrow tunnels at the end to blow up the Death Star. The classic Star Wars tunes are woven in throughout, and there are some well-done transition close-ups of the movie characters serving as cutscenes. As you can see, the graphics are decent. Sure, Luke looks more like Anakin, and the environs are typically just drab layouts with colored hues overlaid, but it gets the job done. The characters animate well, and they control precise enough to make the tougher levels feel doable despite the blind jumps and enemies on ledges you'll run into. I said this one was beatable, but it's not easy. I think it is fun to learn though, so if you have a means of save stating or cheating just a little to make practicing easy for you, then it makes learning the game and finally beating it very rewarding. I know that's not a strategy everyone takes to, but it worked for me, and I was able to knock a game off the backlog that I assumed was out of my league as far as NES Hard is concerned. Well, what was Japan doing for Star Wars games on the Famicom? By the time this version of Star Wars released on the Famicom, the original Star Wars movie had been out for a full decade, so I'm not sure what in tarnation they were drawing inspiration from in this one. You do get to choose your difficulty though, novice or pro. I went with novice for my review here, and thankfully so. And I'll mention that all the text is in Japanese, but you don't need to read it to get through the game, although I would love to have read it to know what in the actual space opera is going on here. Graphically, it's okay. There are some cutscenes that seem awkward, but nothing really to complain about. In motion, the game looks perfectly fine for a 1987 Famicom title. The game starts off making a ton of sense. Jawas take off through the desert with R2-D2 and you gotta go get him back, but... what? You already have your lethal glow stick? We're off the rails already. That's not how it goes in the movie. So anyway, this one is mostly a platformer, and here you march right, slicing and dicing various desert enemies en route to getting R2-D2 back. As you kill enemies, they explode into shiny diamonds that you collect for force points. There's no force meter on screen, so you'll have to pause to see how many points you have. At the beginning, this doesn't matter much, and soon, in the first stage, you'll get to Vader, which is not something that happens in the first film, but okay. And oh god, it's actually a scorpion. One note is that enemies don't stagger or fall back when you hit them. At least, the bosses don't, so you have to hit and jump out of the way to survive. Survive is the key term here. This one is flat out unforgiving. It's a long, confusing slog, especially later on, and you only have 2 continues based on your force points. and no passwords, and no battery save, so yeah, Force be with you, and whatnot. Next, you'll be in the Millennium Falcon even though you've not met Han yet, and you'll blow up some TIE fighters, which is kind of fun to do. You're equipped with 3 shields you can use if one gets too close, but if you take too many hits, it is game over. Next, you'll go to Dagobah to meet Yoda, another thing that doesn't happen in the first movie. The level layouts in this game are atrocious, by the way, and I should mention that you have a blaster weapon as well that comes in pretty handy against some of the more annoying enemies. You can already tell that this one used the movie as an inspiration for the game, but definitely not a recipe, so the story is really out the window here. There's even a swimming level where you take on another false Vader underwater, for crying out loud, and yes, the game is very much structured like Mario in that your princess is always in another castle, and it's never really Vader you're fighting. As you collect those Force Diamonds, you'll unlock the ability to use different Force powers, like one that makes Luke run faster, some that stop enemies, some that shoot lasers from your light wand. There's one that makes you levitate, and one that even warps you back to the beginning of a level, which sounds like garbage, but in the Death Star level, it will come in handy because of the number of dead ends you can't get out of. The Death Star is really the worst thing about this one. It is quite a maze, and one that I admittedly did not figure out despite my best efforts. It's a vast series of hallways, drops, doors, and dead ends. In some areas, you cannot go left anymore. There are deadly enemies all over, and you'll have no real indication of where to go, or really what you're looking for. I even consulted a walkthrough and was still having a tough time figuring out where in the space heck to go. And while I didn't get this far due to my lack of skill and patience, this is only the halfway point. Beyond here, you go to Hoth, blow up some more TIE fighters, venture to Yavin's moons to save Han, and then blow up the Death Star. At least you blow up the Death Star. This one is all over the place, and the level design feels as crudely slapped together as the plot. The Force power system is fine, the familiar Star Wars music and jingles are here, albeit repetitive, the sound design is acceptable, and the space combat levels are decent, but everything else feels knockoff quality. If you want to be amused by how strange this one is for a Star Wars game, be my guest, but don't expect a good time. And finally, The Empire Strikes Back. Again, there was no Return of the Jedi game on the NES, so this is our last Star Wars game on the system, and well, up front, I still prefer the first one the most. This one does have a lot going for it though. It at least follows the film as faithfully as the first did the original, so that's good. You start out on Hoth and you hop along on a tauntaun and down into the depths of an ice cave where the action truly starts. As a kid, I never made it past this part and really stood no chance at beating this game at all because, as the first level makes very clear to the player, the levels here are highly complex and not at all intuitive to navigate. Your main goal is to search around for power-ups, find and kill the boss, and move on. You'll discover your powerful space rod early on and find that it slices through enemies fairly easily, as you'd expect, so keep that in hand. You can even attack enemies with it from the tauntaun. What I didn't know as a kid, because rentals often didn't include the manuals, is that you can hold the jump button down to make Luke or the tauntaun jump higher. Total game changer. So once you are equipped with this knowledge, just scour the caves until you find a wampa, and then hide under here while you murder it. Again, the game plays out like this for the most part. Advance through a maze-like level, fight a boss or mini-boss, and keep going. Bosses take a lot of freaking hits though. Thankfully, as you go, you'll unearth some force abilities. They're not given to you, you must find them. So there's a jump ability which almost looks like a screw attack from Metroid. There's an ability to make Luke faster, one that makes his blaster more blasty, and more. Up in the top left there are 2 meters, one for health and one for force. Different abilities use different amounts of force, so if you have the jump selected, you can use that a bunch before running out, but if run fast is selected, it'll go down pretty quickly. I tried not to use the force powers until I had to. One distinctly aggravating thing about this game is the lack of invincibility frames after taking a hit. This is something we often take for granted in retro games. Even a knockback, as annoying as it can be in games like Castlevania, will at least create some separation between you and the enemy and give you a chance to retaliate. Not here. If an enemy is moving toward you and hits you, you're going to get mopped all the way down the floor. Some enemies move so quickly that you cannot retreat fast enough, again, unless you have that run force ability equipped. There's nothing worse than being trapped in that way and forced to just take tons of damage while you can do nothing to get out of it. Having the life bar is nice, and there's plenty of health sprinkled around. Even enemies give you hearts, and eventually you can unlock a force power that converts your force into health. and there are 9 continues here. Despite that, still a slog. There are no passwords, no saves, and the game is pretty long as it tries to hit all the beats of the film from Hoth, to Walkers, to Echo Base, to Dagobah, to Bespin, to Cloud City, to Boba Fett, to Cloud City again, to finally Darth Vader. There are some puzzles here too, like one where R2-D2 tells you can't go on foot, so you'll need to find an ATST, kill it, and then jump on it to fix it and ride it across. It adds a layer to this platformer you wouldn't expect, and I don't really have any complaints about it. The bigger complaint, really, is that the levels sprawl a bit, but it's nothing a little practice and familiarity can't fix. What absolutely needs to be fixed is the jump mechanic. It's not like it was in the first game, unfortunately. Here the jumps are clunky and feel more like frog leaps than fluid jumps, which will cause you to miss moving platforms, and heck, even some that aren't moving. In fact, most of the movement in this game is clunky and doesn't feel right. A lot of it comes from how small Luke is on screen. I never truly felt in precise control of him. There are some flying stages too, like this one where you have to either explode or trip up the walkers, and you can trip them up. It took me a bit to realize it, but you have 5 trippy ropes you can launch at the legs of the walkers by hitting select when they're in view. Unfortunately, there are 10 total walkers, so you'll need to fly back and forth shooting at least 5 of them to take them down without getting shot yourself. It takes a while, but once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad of a level, and dare I say, a bit fun. Other flying stages include ones where you shoot cloud cars and TIE fighters. Unlike the first Star Wars game, these are horizontal shooting type stages, and not from the cockpit. These levels aren't too bad, but it's tough to get through unscathed. You'll need to kill the amount of enemies shown there on the left, and once you defeat the cloud cars, you must then take out 32 TIE fighters, and they can be quite wily to catch. The game's soundtrack uses recognizable music from the films, but there's barely 5 minutes of total music here, so it gets painfully repetitive. Not to mention, the sound design makes my head hurt, especially when Luke swings his hot stick. Ugh. In all, despite looking pretty good, with varied and colorful environments, something it has over the first, the game controls poorly, is quite difficult, and some of the levels sprawl a bit and leads to unnecessary misdirections that net you more deaths than fun. The level layouts could be forgiven with a password system to encourage exploration. I wanted to like this one, but it's just not as good as the first for me, although some areas, specifically the Walker stage, can be fun. Phew. Well, that does it for Star Wars games on the NES. As you know, there are plenty of Star Wars games out there from back in the day, and I really have to appreciate the first one on the NES for what it does in terms of being pretty fun to play, easy on the eyes, and it sticks to the story on top of sounding and looking good. If I tried to list every classic Star Wars game here, this video would never end, but a few I've played and enjoyed include, of course, the original arcade game, and this Asteroids-style game on the Atari 2600. The Super Nintendo got the whole trilogy. They're fun, look good, and sound good despite once again being kinda long and hard as nails. Check those out if you want a run-and-gun arcade experience in the Star Wars universe. They're hard to beat, both literally and, because they're solid games. The Game Boy versions of both Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back are ports similar to the NES versions, likely with a few small differences, but the same main recipe. The Game Boy got its own Return of the Jedi game, though, which is just a simplified version of the Super Nintendo game. Well, that does it for Star Wars games on the NES and Famicom. As always, lightsaber! There, I said it. And thanks for watching.